Week 11 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units I would start this week. The first one, the New York Giants. So the Giants, another decent matchup here versus the Detroit Lions that give up the 12th most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So the Giants right now, not available in many fantasy leagues, but they've been a decent defense over the last few weeks. Week 7 at Jacksonville, 17 points allowed, a fumble recovery and a block kick. Week 8 at Seattle, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. In Week 10 versus Houston, 16 points allowed, 4 sacks, and then throw in a fumble recovery. So right here, this Lion offense, we know they got a couple decent pieces in Amon St. Brown, Jamal Williams, and DeAndre Swift. But right now, this team on the road, they don't really put up a lot of numbers. I know last week they did score 31 points at the Chicago Bears, but this Giant defense, they've been disciplined, been playing good football, and it's another game I expect the Giants to win this week, where the defense could score anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points. So I got them as a start this week. The next defense is the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens coming off a bye week, getting healthier, and obviously with Roquan Smith being the new man over there in Baltimore, trading for him at the trade deadline with the Chicago Bears. This defense, it could be sky's the limit for them, and they versus a familiar face this week in Baker Mayfield, who's going to be starting once again now for this Carolina Panther team. So over the last few weeks, this defense has gone out there and played good football. Week 7 versus Cleveland, 20 points allowed, 5 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries, and a block kick. Week 8 at Tampa, 22 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. In Week 9 at the Saints, 13 points allowed, 4 sacks and an intho. So right here, it's going to be a tough ball game for Baker Mayfield. And this Raven team, I think they could finish within the top 1 or 2 this week at the defensive position. I think they could get to Baker early and often. Obviously, they know his tendencies and have played him twice a year for the last few seasons when he was on the Cleveland Browns. And right now, besides Donta Foreman and DJ Moore, there's a lack of weapons on this Carolina Panther team. So this week, I think this Raven defense puts the pressure on them and has a big day as a start this week. The next defense is San Francisco 49ers. So in this one, if it's Kyler Murray or Colt McCoy, I think this 49er defense once again could have another good ball game. And this season here, it hasn't been the greatest of years for the defense. Early on, they had some big fantasy days, but the last few weeks, they've definitely fallen off. Week 7 versus Kansas City, 42 points allowed, a sack and into a fumble recovery. Week 8 at the Rams, 14 points allowed, 2 sacks. And then Week 10 after the bye versus the Chargers, 16 points allowed, 3 sacks and an intho. So right here, Kyler Murray, we know this Niner team is very familiar with him, obviously, versing him 2 times a year in the division. And Kyler Murray, we know sometimes he tries to go for the big play and gets himself in trouble. And he takes a lot of sacks as well for a quarterback that looks to run a decent amount of time. So right now, San Francisco, if it's Murray, I think they can make a few plays. But if it's Colt McCoy, this defense could take things to the next level this week. So right here, I like the 49ers defense this week here as a start. The next defense, the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles coming off that shocking loss to the Washington Commanders. Eagles, they were flying high in that ball game, got off to a quick start. But the defense, they had a few problems in that one, even though they still finished with a decent fantasy day with 7 fantasy points. So the last few games here for this team, Week 8 versus the Steelers, 13 points allowed, 6 sacks, an interception, a fumble recovery. Week 9 at the Texans, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 intros. And Week 10 versus the Commanders, 26 points allowed, 3 sacks, an intro, and a fumble recovery. So Week 11 here, great matchup with the Colts. They give up the second most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. So right here, this Eagle team, I think, gets back on track in this one. This offensive line is horrible over there in Indianapolis. And once you get a hand on Matt Ryan as well, he's going down at his old age. So right here, I think the Eagles come out. Defense sets the tone in this ball game. And right now, this team's one of the best defenses in the league with a great front line. 8-1 still on the season, even after coming off a very bad loss versus division rival, the Commanders. I think Philly in this one bounces back and is a team that could have a top performance as well, possibly this week at the defense position. And the fifth and final defense, I would look to start this week's New England Patriots. So the Patriots, their defense gets stronger as the season goes on over the last few years. And this season, they've been starting to put up numbers as a DST. And this week, a good matchup versus the New York Jets, where they beat them in Week 8. So the last few games for this Patriot DST. Week 7 versus the Bears, 33 points allowed, which was a little fluky on Monday Night Football. 4 sacks and into Week 8 at the same Jet team they're versing this week. 17 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions. And Week 9, what a ball game it was versus the Colts. Before the bye week, 3 points allowed, 9 sacks, a pick 6 and a block kick. So right here, this Jet team, we know Zach Wilson is the quarterback here for this Jet team and not doing much this season. And Bill Belichick, throughout his career, his defenses have great track records versus young quarterbacks, especially going into Gillette Stadium. So this week here, Zach Wilson, it's going to be a tough one for him. This defense, like I said, they've been putting up fantasy points with 220 or more fantasy plus days since week 5. I don't say they're going to get 20 plus points, but I think anywhere from 9 to 13 fantasy points is definitely a possibility for this New England defense. And their defense, I would start this week, no doubt about it. So that's a few defense DST units I look to start here for week 11 of the fantasy football season.